There's a bit of wind, and the ice that we were on was moving in all directions all around us. And there's a patch of thin ice about 400 metres wide. We made a decision as a group to go across the ice. And normally you travel in a train for maximum efficiency, one behind the other. And as soon as we were on the ice, our sledges were breaking the ice behind us, and the ice was bending under our skis like it would do if you were skiing across a trampoline, because sea ice is quite elastic. It bends a bit and then it snaps and then you go through. So for each one of us, our sledge was breaking the ice behind us, and we didn't speak at all, but if any one of us had gone in through the ice, we would have had to leave them behind. That was hard, thinking, if I go through, I'm not going to see my friends again. If Adam or Charlie goes through, I'm not going to see them again. If they both go through, I'm on my own.
If you lead an interesting life, good pictures will happen.
Oh, nice. You might well be my sexiest sounding guest.
Go somewhere you've never been before and take a camera.
We had this gorgeous Mediterranean light just flowing in.
Which Asda were you in?
Dartford.
Very nice.
Your first 10,000 pictures of your worst.
Let's sit down, let's have a cup of tea.
Welcome to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to another episode of the Standout Photography Show with me, Matthew Walker, where as always it is my honour and privilege to interview the finest working photographers in the world, to unpack their systems, workflows, and find out what enables them to perform consistently at the very top of their profession. My guest today is Martin Hartley. That is at Martin Hartley on Instagram and martinhartley.com on the World Wide Webs. That is Hartley, Hartley. Martin is a travel, adventure and expedition photographer working in some of the most challenging environments on the planet. Martin has spent more than 400 days working in the Arctic and Antarctic on more than 20 polar expeditions and assignments. Several of these endeavours have focused on collecting data to help scientists better understand our planet. Time magazine has acknowledged Martin's contribution to science with its prestigious Hero of the Environment award for his research work on multiple surveys of the frozen Arctic Ocean. In 2007, Martin joined a North Pole expedition to collect snow depth measurements for the European Space Agency's CryoSat program, which is being conducted in concert with NASA's Operation IceBridge mission. Now, I could have spoken to Martin for hours upon hours about his work, and I was extremely grateful that he gave up more than 2 hours of his time to speak with us. As such, this is the first two-part episode on the Standout Photography Show. Martin is a fascinating human being, and during our conversation we cover a multitude of topics, including the importance of workspaces and why standing at your desk rather than sitting can maximise your productivity, surviving in the Arctic Ocean, preparing equipment, using less equipment to enhance creativity, packing lean, documenting ice formations in the Arctic Ocean, pre-visualization, and of course taking the FA Cup to the South Pole in a sleeping bag. So without further ado, please enjoy part one of my conversation with the wonderful Martin Hartley. Martin Hartley, it is a huge pleasure to say welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Got there eventually.
We did. Yes, now that takes me on beautifully, because before we came on air just a second ago, you were telling me about a story about how you sadly broke your neck about 20 years ago, and I stopped you because I wanted to get it on tape. So, would you mind starting again at the beginning of that story?
Well, it's a really quite a exotic injury, and it happened when I was photographing the end of an adventure race in the Lake District. This was back when I was using film cameras. And I'd run out of film in the camera I had in my hand, and I knew I had a spare one in my hotel room that was preloaded. And the race was finishing, and there was people coming across the finish line, and I ran back to the hotel to get my spare camera, banged my head, sprinting up the staircase on something called a newel post, which is a piece of ornate furniture that hangs down from the next level of staircase up. And I hit my head so hard, I had the wine glasses on the bar downstairs rattle, and then I heard someone say, "Martin, are you okay?" And I said, "Actually, no, I'm not." And then everything stopped working from my chin down, and I just fell backwards, banged my head again, on the wall, and then I couldn't move until I had a massive operation to remove 3 parts of the spine from my neck. So that was quite unexciting several months following that.
Oh my goodness, I can imagine. So you said you were paralysed from the neck down, is that correct?
Yeah, from the chin down. So.
Wow, and how long were you in that state for?
It was a couple of weeks before I had the operation, and then 6 months before I could walk properly again without support.
Wow, well, I'm thrilled that you managed to get the operation and that you are fighting fit again, because otherwise we would not have all of this wonderful content to discuss today. So this is one of the interviews, having done all of my research looking into your work, I think it's probably the most excited I've been about speaking to a photographer, because you have done some incredible things in your career. But for anyone that is unfamiliar with you and your work, how would you describe yourself and your work as a photographer?
That depends who I'm talking to. So sometimes I say I'm a travel photographer because it saves a lot of explanation. People understand what a travel photographer is. Sometimes I say I'm an adventure photographer. Then people get a better idea the kind of travel I do is adventurous. And sometimes, if I'm talking to someone who knows a little bit more, I will say I'm an expedition photographer who gets paid by sponsors to document ongoing scientific journeys or expeditions that have a sense of purpose. And if I'm at a wedding, then I might say I'm a wedding photographer to try and get some more work.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned option number 3, because that's what we're going to come on to a little bit later on. One of the things when I was looking into your work, you said a quote, one of my favourite times of the year is when I'm actually standing at my computer screens editing some of the world's most beautifully crafted adventure photographs for Sidetracked magazine. Now, we'll come on to Sidetracked a little bit later on, but the thing that stood out for me was that you said you were standing at your computer screens. Is that a typo, or are you stood at your desk when you're working? I
have a desk that goes up and down, so I quite like standing because it takes pressure off my back and my neck. So I quite like standing at my computer, especially when doing editing, because I don't need to use a keyboard to type. So I quite like standing at the computer. Everyone should do it.
Well, the reason it stood out for me, because I'm currently renovating our studio and I've built our desks so that they're all at standing height, because for me, I find I get more work done and I'm more productive when I'm stood, and I don't know why, and I was trying to figure it out. So as soon as I saw that, it stood out to me. What is it about standing rather than sitting that makes you more effective?
Well, I think I can probably answer that quite successfully, having had 20 years of talking to chiropractors about my neck injury and brain injury, is that when you're stood up, your brain is working really hard to keep you vertical. So your brain is switched on in a way that it isn't when you're sat down. So when you're standing, the amount of muscles and brain power you need to use just to stay vertical, just to stand still, is huge. So your brain is actively whirring away, being very busy, so it's awake. And when you're sat down, lots of that, huge parts of your brain are turned off. So I think that's probably what it is.
So you're more alert when you're working, and you've got more concentration and focus when you're stood.
Yeah, because your neural pathways are alive and kicking when you're standing up, working really hard. Because having lost my sense of balance, that's another injury I collected in my brain. Standing up it takes up a massive amount of brain power just to stand. So you can imagine walking and talking or cycling, anything that requires your balance to be super fine-tuned requires your brain to be awake. So if I'm sat down, like everyone does in the office at 5 o'clock, they start fading because they're just tired and your brain's relaxed. Whereas if you stood up, there's no option for your brain to get tired because you have to keep working to stand up. So it's switched on.
What does your workspace look like? Because it's one of the things that I hadn't really planned for these conversations, but when speaking to photographers, we all seem to enjoy are work environments, and a lot of people, including yourself, their work is on location. What does your home setup look like? What does your office look like?
Oh, well, I've actually had to move my office. When the lockdown came into effect, I was renting a space in a shared office with a location agency in Bristol. It's nice to have other people around because nice to have a bit of banter. And then I didn't want to spend money on the office, so I've now got my office in my kit room. So I've got all my photography books behind me, and climbing ropes and things for dragging sledges behind me, and some old shelves from the Royal Geographic Society, and of course ammunition boxes that are great for storing hard drives. But it is really important. Your workspace is really important. So I could work in the living room, which is big and bright and lots of space and a big table in there. But it's too relaxing. So I'll come in here into my kit storage room, and I feel like I'm at work. So it is important that when you're at work, you're not somewhere else.
Yeah, it's super important. And will you go into wherever your workspace is, and will you dedicate X amount of time to your work rather than dipping in and out, particularly if you're working at home? Yeah,
working from home I find it really hard to work from home. I have to confess that I don't like it. Too many distractions. There's a fridge there full of food, so I end up cooking nice lunches when I should be actually at my desk filling in boring spreadsheets and things like that. So yeah, when I go to work, I want to be at work in brain. I don't want to be relaxing and having a nice time sat on the sofa with a laptop and a cup of tea. And I know for a fact that not now, but when I first went freelance, just because you're freelance, people think you sat at home with a cup of tea having a nice time.
Yes, of course. I read a quote once, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something like, if you're working, let's say you're 40, 50 minutes into working and you're doing very specific work and you're concentrating on it, if you get interrupted, you can afford the time. So let's say someone interrupts you for 5 minutes. You can afford those 5 minutes, but can you afford the interruption? Because do you see what I mean? Because when you're working, you get into a very focused state, and then you almost have to start again if you get interrupted. Do you ever find that?
Yeah, I think when I'm editing images, it's a bit like driving a car. And when you come off the motorway to a service station and sit down, or leave your car, go and grab a cup of tea, get back in your car, then you have to really wind yourself up to get back into driving mode again. And it's the same when you're working with, when you're either taking pictures or when you're editing or when you're doing something on a computer. I think that's a really good point, actually. The momentum, you need to get your brain working again into the same space is quite hard.
Why photography? And I know that is extremely broad, and I've thought about this a lot as I've been speaking to other photographers. And for me, there's multiple reasons, but one of them is if you see an image in a moment and you capture it, it's there forever. And if you miss it, it's gone forever. And I think it's not quite as black and white for me, but it's somewhere along those lines. Why photography for you?
I think there's two parts to this answer. One is I got my first camera when I was 5 years old. It came at Christmas time in an adventure kit, ironically. There's a little plastic camera with a black and white roll of film in there, shows how old I am, and there was 12 exposures on there. There was a compass and a water bottle, and the penknife had been removed for fear of me injuring myself. And I think if I'm going to get wholly meaningful about it, I took every single one of those frames of photographs of my sister and her friend skipping, gave the camera to my mum and forgot about it. And then a couple of weeks later, my mum said, "Oh, here's your photographs back." And I can remember opening the envelope and looking at something I saw a couple of weeks previously on pieces of paper in front of me, and that was just pure magic. And there's a lot of the frames were overlapped, so because I hadn't wound the camera on properly, but I just thought it was pure magic. And I think the gratification I received as a little boy from taking pictures and people going, "Oh, that's nice, well done," I think that might be a kind of addictive response to getting praise. That's the only praise I've really got from my mum and dad. That's not quite true. It's being a bit unkind, but the point is, I think when you're a photographer, and it happens now more often. Now we have digital. You take a picture and you show someone, and they say, "Oh my God, that's amazing." So when you're a little boy, and someone's going, "Oh, that's amazing, well done," you want to keep repeating that to get the praise. So that might be what it was subconsciously. Then later on, I saw a photograph in a book, which I still have here. I must have been 8 or 9 or 10. And it was a photograph taken by Jim Stanfield for National Geographic. And it was a photograph of a surgeon in an operating theatre looking at some monitors while there was one of the world's first heart transplant patients on the bed next to him. He looks absolutely knackered. And in the corner, one of the assistant nurses is slumped against a wall, asleep. And on the floor, there's swabs covered in blood, and there's tools on the floor, and there's patches of blood on the floor of the operating theatre. And I saw that and I thought, my God, how on earth can I get myself into that kind of situation? And the only way to do that is with a camera. Only a photographer or a surgeon could be in a place like that. And that photograph, I think, set fire to my brain, thinking, wow, I want to see those kind of things. And the only way you can see them is if you've got a camera, because a camera will get you into far more places than your passport will. Definitely.
You mentioned then that you got your first camera at age 5. So where did your professional career start as a photographer?
That's a really good question, actually, Matthew. I get told off for saying this, but I wanted to be a vet when I was younger. I wanted to be James Herriot, a farm vet. I didn't know photography was a career. It didn't occur to me that people would get paid to go and take pictures. I thought photographers, all the way up until I was in my early teens, I thought photographers were people who photographed babies and weddings. I didn't realise that the pictures I was looking at in magazines and newspapers were not just people who happened to be in the right place at the right time, but they were people with jobs with cameras. I was pretty stupid, I think, not making the connection. And then I entered a competition, the Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, and I came runner-up, aged 15 or 16, 1987. And my dad said, well, why don't you be a photographer then? The careers advisor said to me, Martin, there's no way you're going to be that, not with these grades. Why don't you think about being a nurse? So then I applied for a place on Bulmerston Pool College of Art and Design Photography course and a national diploma, and got onto that, and that's where it started.
Do you remember what image you submitted for the Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year?
Yes, and it's the irony now kills me. It was a photograph of taken at the back of the house where I lived in Rochdale of is a tiny, tiny rock face that is covered in massive icicles from the water that had drained off the land and frozen as it came over this like miniature cliff. And that hasn't formed since, because obviously, it hasn't been cold enough to do that. So it was a landscape image of ice, which is quite ironic, isn't it?
Well, since then, your career has come a long, long way. You've worked, and I read, in some of the most extreme places on Earth and for extended periods of time, which I think is the key point. For example, you've spent more than 400 days working in the Arctic and Antarctic on more than 20 polar expeditions and assignments. From all of those, what's the most challenging situation you've encountered on a trip, and how did you ensure that the quality of your work wasn't affected?
Well, the most challenging situation, there's quite a few actually. I'm trying to narrow one down.
I mean, we can do a couple because I'm sure they are equally as interesting.
Okay, well, the most threat I've experienced was on the Arctic Ocean I was with two other people, Andy Daniels and Charlie Payton, and we'd just packed the tent up. It was about day 65 of an expedition. We'd been on the ice gathering data for scientists somewhere not too far from the North Pole. The weather was really bad. The previous weeks had been really bad weather, very cold. We'd been camping on ice that was very, very thin. And we ended up looking for thick lumps of ice to put the tent up in case the wind picked up and the ice started moving, because the ice we would spend our days skiing on was really thin. So one morning we packed tent up, and in the first hour you're really, really cold. It takes you an hour to get your body temperature up to something that's approaching comfortable. And there was a bit of wind, and the ice that we were on was moving in all directions all around us. And behind us, the ice had broken, and there was open water behind us. There was open water to the east and the south of us. And there's a very, very thin patch of ice. I think we're going west, or not going north, because there's no way we could go north. And there's a patch of thin ice about 400 metres wide. And it's very peculiar how we all responded to it. We made a decision as a group of three to go across the ice. And normally you travel in a train for maximum efficiency, one behind the other. So I said, right, we'll have to cross. Let's cross now, but let's not cross one behind another. Let's just spread out so we don't weaken the ice for the one behind. So we all spread out. And as soon as we were on the ice, our sledges were breaking the ice behind us, and the ice was bending under our skis like it would do if you were skiing across a trampoline, because sea ice is quite elastic. And it does bend a little bit, and it's quite unnerving because it bends a bit and then it snaps and then you go through. So for each one of us, our sledge was breaking the ice behind us, and we didn't speak at all. But if any one of us had gone in through the ice, we would have had to have leave them behind, because we wouldn't have been able to pull the person out, because we would have broken the ice with the extra weight added onto our skis by pulling on someone. So we was going across this piece of ice, really wanting to take a picture behind me, to keep my camera over my shoulder the whole time. And I was praying and praying and praying, because it was bad weather. So if someone had gone through the ice, there was no way they could have been rescued for, until the weather cleared up, until we found some thick ice, which may not have happened in the next week. So that was hard, thinking, if I go through, I'm not going to see my friends again. If Anne or Charlie goes through, I'm not going to see them again. If they both go through, I'm on my own. And I've only got part of the tent, not the whole tent. So, and I didn't have a satellite telephone, so I was thinking, crikey, everyone is really exposed here. And we got across the other side. 400 metres felt like a long way, and I took a picture over my shoulder without looking behind me, because I was so scared to turn my skis and look behind. I just put the camera up and did a sort of reverse selfie without me in it over my shoulder. And I didn't dare look at what I saw at the back of the camera. And then eventually we got to a piece of thick ice, and my mouth was dry and my throat was tight and I couldn't speak. And I was literally on the edge of tears with full-blown fear. So that was one occasion.
That is a true photographer there. Even staring potential death in the face, you still took a shot.
I think if you're going to be a photographer, you have to be on the edge of being the equivalent of photography autistic, because if you're not possessed by taking pictures, then you're in the wrong job, I think.
What did the shot look like?
One of the sponsor's badge was peeling off my shoulder, and I can see the threads coming off that, and there was my sledge and Charlie's sledge had gone through the ice, and there was quite a few patches behind us where the sledge had broken through, and it's a terrible picture, but it's the memory of it comes gushing back to my brain when I look at it. So even though it's not a beautiful picture or even remotely good as a composition or it's a correct exposure, and it's just a document of a memory that might have faded otherwise.
I guess, again, that's one of the most wonderful things about photography, is that it brings back those emotions as soon as you look at an image, particularly if you've taken it. To what extent are you aware of those dangers before you go on a trip like that?
Very aware. When I've packed my bags and loaded them into the car or the taxi or the minibus, whatever, when I leave home, when I close the door behind me, I always listen to the sound of that door closing, and then thinking, I wonder if I'm going to hear that sound again. Because the variables are so wide and far apart on expeditions, when we all leave our homes, we're never 100% confident we're going to get back in for whatever reason, just in case, a car slides off the road and hits you or something horrible happens. But when you're leaving to go somewhere where there's no safety potential, then that does make you think from this point onwards, I'm on the edge of what's called an incident pit, which an incident pit it's sort of a flat line that starts off gently sloping down and then gets steeper and steeper and steeper until the line is vertical. And when you're on the edge of the incident pit, you are one step away from entering that zone where if something goes wrong and you don't prevent it getting more wrong, then that curve gets steeper and steeper and steeper until you can't get out of it. You need to be taken out of it. So that's in your mind when you leave home to go to the airport.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. I've never heard of that before, an incident pit. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can explore further if they'd like to. One of the other things that really jumped out at me, and it's something... It sounds so simple when you read it, but it hadn't even crossed my mind, is that you'd written you can't charge batteries or backup images when you're in somewhere like the Antarctic, and you mentioned then you were 65 days into a trip. What does your preparation look like for a trip like that? In terms of... I guess there's two answers to that, really. There's your personal preparation for your own safety, and then there's your work preparation in terms of batteries and kit.
Yeah, so just my correction. So in Antarctica, when you go on an expedition to Antarctica, the sun is 24 hours daylight. The sun is quite high in the sky, so there's enough energy from the sun to use solar panels to recharge things during the day. But in the Arctic,
I see.
In the Arctic, the sun, the start of an expedition, if you leave in February, pops up above the horizon about 9:30 and then disappears at 2:30. And it stays very low in the sky. So there's not enough energy from the sun to use solar energy to charge batteries. So you have to take everything with you. And being a photographer, you have to carry your own kit, your own personal kit, your own food, fuel, sleeping bags, extra clothes or whatever, and photography kit, which isn't the psychological burden you think it might be, because as a photographer, as you well know, it's hard to leave pieces of equipment behind. So
it's very hard to leave bits behind.
So on a few expeditions, I have taken a tripod and cursed it every single step, because I hate tripods. I hate them with a passion. Even the light ones, I just can't bear to use them. So I've actually managed to stop taking a tripod with me. But then nowadays people ask me to shoot video, so I'm stuck with a bloody tripod to shoot video now and again. So
how long has it taken you to learn that discipline? Because, like, you smiled then when we said it, I'm that guy that when I'm packing gear, I'm the, just in case. Let's put that lens in just in case. Put that in just in case. How long has it taken you to learn to pack lean?
Well, I learned a very hard lesson. It's a bit embarrassing, but I'll tell you. This is when I realised I didn't need to take everything with me. So a few years ago, I had a job working on a research vessel on the Black Sea, and the client booked a taxi for me to take me from Bristol to Gatwick Airport at it was about 1:20 in the morning because the flight left Gatwick quite early. And then it was on the 1st of June, which was a Friday. And I'll try and get this right. So I went home from my office thinking I'll keep Wednesday clear to pack all my photography equipment and empty flashcards and charge batteries and clean chips and pack everything. I'll have all day Wednesday to do that. Sorry, all day Thursday, sorry. And I went to bed. And about 11:30 or something. And my phone rang at 1:15 in the morning. Because I just thought that 1:15 in the morning was on Friday when the 1st of June started, not Thursday. It was that kind of rollover. I hadn't done the calculation. So I had... The phone rang and I picked it up and the guy said, taxi waiting outside. And it took me a couple of seconds to process. I thought, oh my God, I've missed a day. I've lost a day thinking, because it's gone midnight, of course, it's already the 1st of June, because it's gone past midnight. I was thinking I'd got an extra day anyway, do you understand the point I'm making?
I can feel the anxiety rising in me just thinking about it.
Yeah, and for a second I said, okay. I put the phone and I thought, right, I can send the taxi away, I can get my shit together, and I can order a new taxi. I thought, no, I can't, because I won't have time. I can't miss the plane because the ship is leaving port. I get off the plane, taxi to the ship leaves port. You're not going to stop any of that happening if you miss that flight. So I took a deep breath, and then I was packed with my clothes and my cameras in 8 minutes and in the taxi. But normally I keep all my equipment at home, my photography equipment. For some reason, I've taken some of it to the office. Some of the flashcards, some of the batteries, some of the lenses. For some reason, I'd split up my kit. And I just moved into the office, told the taxi driver to go by the office space, got there. I'd never been there late at night. And there was this massive gate I couldn't get over or through. So all I had with me was one camera body, Nikon D3X, 2 batteries, and about 3 flashcards, and a 20mm lens and a 17 to 35mm lens. That was it. So I spent the entire shoot just using those 2 lenses and recycling the flashcards, which I never do normally because I don't like deleting before I've finished the job. So I had to clear the flashcards every day and back them up, and then just use a 17mm, 17 to 35, and a 20mm lens for everything. And then I realised, actually, I don't need a 70-200, and I don't need a 55 to 70, and I don't need my whatever it was. Because I've got 2 85mm lenses, a 20mm lens, and 2 24mm lenses, because I think you can do everything with a 24mm lens, more or less. Portraits, landscapes, action pictures, if you're close enough. And I didn't have a choice. And life gets very easy when you don't have a choice. That's when I realised I don't need tons of kit.
I mean, you took some beautiful images on that trip, because we're going to come on to speak about it later, so it clearly didn't hinder you too much, but I can imagine it was a very panicked affair. Has there ever been... In fact, before we come on to that, I think it's interesting you said then, when you have less choice, it almost makes things easier, because there is the danger with our jobs that, again, I'm that guy. I will take sometimes too much just in case, but actually, with less equipment sometimes, it forces you to think more creatively. Did you find that when you were on that expedition?
I did, actually. It's funny you should raise that point, because a friend of mine, Alistair Humphreys, he's a really good photographer. He's done a lot of travel. He sent me a message a few days ago saying, Martin, I think I'm going to buy a film camera so it changes the way I think about his photography. And I said, no, don't get a film camera. Just go out tomorrow, take your 85mm lens and leave everything else at home and shoot everything on that. Landscapes, close-ups, whatever you see, just take that one lens out and leave it at f2.8 f2, I think. So just shoot everything on the widest aperture, and just do that, and see how that changes the way you think when you've got your camera in your hand. And he came back with some amazing results. And because he had no choice about what lenses, even which aperture to use, because I told him just keep that aperture and just use that one lens for everything and see what happens. It does make things easier when you don't have a choice, which I think is lost on a lot of photographers because they've got multiple lenses and multiple possibilities. And if you narrow it down and say, I'm going to shoot this with this and that and nothing else, then it's a really powerful focusing mechanism.
I think it's really good advice. It's really, really good advice. Has there ever been a sliding doors moment, so to speak, in your career where, had you made a different choice, your career could have looked very different?
That's a very good question. Yes, there was a sliding doors moment. There really was. I was doing special effects photography working for a guy called Phil Jason in London. So I'd spend my time in the studio and on location taking photographs, and then the time in the colour darkroom basically assembling what is a old-fashioned equivalent of a photographic jigsaw puzzle, a montage in the darkroom using lith masks and dodging and shading and overlapping and multiple exposures. So some prints would have 300 exposures on them to create special effects. And a friend of mine suggested I applied for a place on an Everest expedition in 1993 to join the Duke of Edinburgh War Scheme as their photographer to put the first British woman on Everest, on the summit of Everest, Rebecca Stevens. I had to write an essay about the tourism problems of Nepal. This is back in '93. This is the sliding doors moment. So my essay, I did it late. I had to drive it around to the guy that was reading the entries for the essays, a chap called Paul Deegan. I turned up at 11:30 at night on a Monday evening with my essay in hand. He opened the door, invited me in for a cup of tea, got chatting with him for a couple of hours. Lovely bloke. And I was invited for a place on the expedition to take photographs for an Everest trek to Everest Base Camp. And this guy, Paul Deegan, he's one of my very best friends today. He's probably responsible for changing my life as a photographer, because after that expedition, oh, by the way, he said my essay was rubbish, but he thought I was a good bloke. So the sliding doors moment came in 1999 when he said, would I join him on an expedition to Kyrgyzstan to photograph a mountain range that Westerners hadn't ever been on before, and would I come as a photographer? And of course I said yes. It was a region I never heard of, didn't know where it was until I was shown on a map. No Westerns had been there. There was 6,000 metre peaks that were unclimbed. And ironically, I sold all my camera equipment and all my colour darkroom equipment to pay for me to go on the trip, hoping I'd get a camera brand sponsor. And thankfully, Mamiya Cameras supplied me with equipment for the expedition. Thankfully, otherwise, I don't know what I'd have done. Anyway, so I came back from that expedition. It was a sponsored expedition by Motorola. They paid for the expedition, and they paid for my expenses and for my film and my processing. Fuji gave me a load of film as well, ProVia 100. And I came back from that expedition and realised that as a photographer, if you can organise an expedition and get a corporate sponsor to pay for it in exchange for photographs, that would be a great ticket to do travel photography and expedition photography and make some money from it as well. So myself and Paul Deegan did a lot of expeditions together. He would write and I would take pictures and would sell the pictures afterwards or get a corporate sponsor to pay for them. So that's how I started off in the expedition photography world in 1999. If I hadn't met Paul Deegan, I would probably be still in London doing special effects photography using Photoshop and digital tools.
It's a very interesting way of turning your income on its head. I spoke to a lovely man called Timothy Allen who said something very similar, because a lot of photographers can spend their career their careers can be dictated by what comes through the door, essentially, from clients. So your portfolio looks like it's being designed by somebody else's vision, essentially. Whereas Tim said something very similar to what you said, whereas turn that on its head and create assets through your photography that you can then sell. Is it something that you still do now in your photography?
Wow.
Because I imagine that's got harder nowadays.
Yes, it does.
Due to the digital age and stock images, etc.
Yeah.
Or the accessibility too, should I say.
Yes, photography, the stock photography market, without putting too fine a point on, the art has fallen out of it. I have some images with Getty and I'll get checks for 38 pence in the post. Who's going to buy? I mean, you can't earn a living from that kind of income from selling your assets in photos. I mean, it's terrible the way the market's gone in that respect. But I think a really good example of how I've managed to turn my favourite place as a business on its head, if I can call it a business, is my next expedition to go is, I realise this, the last of the oldest ice in the Arctic Ocean isn't going to be around for much longer, and it hasn't ever been documented. I'm the only photographer for sure, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet, it seems to be a fact I've discovered in the last couple of years. The only photographer that's got photographs of a lot of sea ice formations no one else has got, because people who go on North Pole expeditions generally only go on the last 60 miles. And if people do full North Pole expeditions, 500 odd miles, 600 miles, they're not photographers, and they're not really interested particularly in the sea ice as a entity. They're more interested in getting to the North Pole under whatever, in any way they can. My drive has been to go to the Arctic Ocean to photograph the ice. So I'm pulling together an expedition now to go and photograph those last pieces of multi-year sea ice before they come extinct. And the expedition is going to cost probably around $1 million to do, which is money I'll have to raise. I'll have help doing that, but the assets at the end of that will become very important images long after I'm dead, because there won't be any images of that kind of ice anywhere.
Wow. That is... I mean, that is going above and beyond. That sounds fascinating.
Mm. And to get to the ice, you have to do it on skis. You can't really fly a helicopter because the range of helicopters is not big enough to go there. So you have to do it on skis. You can't do it any other way. And it's so far away from getting dropped off at northern Greenland and skiing across to Canada is quite an undertaking. And I've just, by accident almost, developed these skills that myself and my teammates can live on the frozen skin of a partially frozen ocean now and take pictures. Weird set of things.
I'm extremely envious. It sounds incredible. Let's move on to something a little bit closer to home, which I've been dying to talk to you about, which is the FA Cup. You summed it up beautifully. You said the FA Cup is a proud tradition in English football, and it's also known as the beautiful game. It's the greatest unrehearsed theatre known to man and has the power to release every known emotion. There are winners and losers at every match, both on and off the pitch. So, can you explain what your project was for the FA Cup?
You have done your homework. I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you.
So I had an email come into my inbox from a chap called James Robinson, who was head of an agency that does the social media and the PR for the Football Association. And they wanted a adventure photographer, not a sports photographer, to document the adventure of the fans for a social media campaign called #FA Cup Adventure. And they wanted a photographer to go out with the fans, walk down the streets on the way to the stadium, whoever the fans were, men, boys, women, document the adventure being their journey from home to the match and back home again, whether there was celebrations or commiserations at the end of it. Document the entire process of going to a football match, watching it, and then celebrating or commiserating. And I'm not a football fan. I used to be. I used to have a season ticket for Manchester United, but I'm not. Let's just say I'm not a football fan anymore at all. And I said in the meeting when they're discussing how I would do the documenting of the fans, I said, well, I'm off to the South Pole in a week's time. Why don't I take the FA Cup with me? And I said it as a joke, half a joke. Why don't I take the FA Cup with me to the South Pole, and then that FA Cup can have its own real adventure, and you can kickstart the campaign with a photograph of the FA Cup at the South Pole. And everyone laughed and thought I was totally bonkers and actually joking, and then dismissed it straight away, and we carried on with the meeting. And then, that was on the Monday. I was going to Antarctica on the Saturday, and the phone rang at 11:30 at night. I don't normally pick up the phone, but it was a London number, so I thought, I wonder who that could be. And it was one of the guys, it was James Robinson. He said, Martin, well, I just finished a meeting, 11:30 at night, just finished a meeting, and if you can get the FA Cup insured, you can take it to the South Pole with you. So, luckily, one of my previous expedition sponsors, Catlin, was an insurance specialist. So just one phone call. I said, please can you insure it? I don't want to pay for insurance, but can you I'll give you some photographs of the FA Cup and you can use them in your social media afterwards. And went, no problem at all, Martin. How much is it worth? I said, it's 40 grand. So that's just the cost of the 7 kilograms of solid silver that FA Cup is made from. So I got it insured and I picked it up at the airport. Do you want to hear what happened at the airport?
Absolutely.
So, it helps not being an avid football fan, I have to say. At this moment, it really helps being so blasé about it. And then that backfired on me. So I took a blue food barrel with me that I take on expeditions. It's just a very unglamorous plastic blue container with a black lid and a metal closing strap. I knew it would come in a flashy case. I met this guy in Heathrow Airport, and he said, I'll meet you in this corner. And it was literally a dark and dusty corner of Heathrow Airport. This guy turned up, covered in tattoos, big fat neck, tattoos on his neck, tattoos on his wrist, lots of jewellery on his neck and his fingers, shaved head, T-shirt that was too small, that kind of a vision. Dragging this shiny black case with silver edges. He's a nice bloke, actually. And he took the FA Cup out of the box. And of course, it's quite a beautiful looking thing, and it's covered in ribbons, and it's big, and it's shiny, and it looks precious. And he said, pass me your phone. So I passed him my phone. He took some pictures of it on my phone, and then I WhatsApped pictures to him, so he had copies of the FA Cup undamaged on his phone that I'd sent him as a kind of piece of evidence that it was undamaged when I accepted it.
So it's a bit like taking a rental car.
Yes, it's a bit like that, yes. Just like that. And I pulled it out of the case. I said, I'm not taking the case. It's too obvious that there's something precious in it. I'm going to put it in here. So I pulled out this horrible old army sleeping bag and stuffed the FA Cup in it and put it in this blue barrel, put it on my trolley, and I put my hands on the trolley to take it away. And he said, that is going on the seat next to you in the aircraft, isn't it? And I said, no. And he went, no, that is going on the seat next to the aircraft, isn't it? I said, no, it's going in the hold. And I didn't realise I'd said it in such an antagonistic way. I was just thinking, no, I can't afford a ticket for this. I'm not going to. And he just said, you're a fucking idiot, and walked away. At that point, I realised what I'd taken on. He said, that cup has never been out of the country without its own feet in terms of a bodyguard. So I had become the bodyguard for the FA Cup, a national treasure, if you're a football fan. I was wearing a blue T-shirt at the time. I remember walking through Heathrow Airport and sweating and patches of sweat appearing on my T-shirt. And then I was approaching the gate, not the gate, the check-in area, and these two policemen came at me in a pincer movement with these massive machine guns, right up to me without saying anything, and stopped and said, "What's in the blue barrel, sunshine?" Oh, fuck. I didn't have any paperwork at all. Sorry, I must stop swearing.
No, it's totally fine.
I said, I'll have to take it out and show you, because you won't believe me. And the guy said, no, it's fine, just tell us what it is. I said, no, I will have to show you, because if I tell you what it is, you just won't believe me. No, just tell us. So it's FA Cup. There's no smile, no response, nothing. He said, okay, get it out. So I pulled out this green, horrible, rotting sleeping bag. That was the padding for the cup. And pulled out the FA Cup. And he looked at his mate, and then looked back at me, and he did say, what the fuck are you doing with that? So I had to explain what I've just told you. And then they couldn't do enough for me. They took me straight to the front of the queue and helped me when I just unloaded my bags and check everything in, including the FA Cup. And then, because of where I was stood, because I was stood next to a police officer at another airport, because I dared have it go through a scanner and someone think I'd stolen it and me be arrested and miss my flight. So when I got off at Dubai, I went and found a policeman and said, look, I've got this piece of luggage coming through. Can you just help me get it out in case I get stopped because of XYZ? And he was a football fan as well. And I was stood at a scanner, and you can see it perfectly sweated. I said, can I take a picture of the scanner of it, the X-ray? And he said, no, you can't do that, which is such a shame. Anyway, so from that point onwards, I couldn't wait to give it back because I realised it is a precious thing and I shouldn't be so casual about it, and it is something that people actually worship.
And forgive my ignorance on the FA Cup. I'm guessing there is only one FA Cup. There's not been, multiples over the years where one has been broken or something of that ilk.
That's a really good question. I didn't know there was, but there's two. There's one that gets taken around the country to show people, to promote the football, the FA Cup. And there's another one that's the real one that they lift up. And I got the real one because they wanted it to be authentic.
Wow.
And I knew that. And I said, well, what if it gets damaged? What if what if it ends up in the bottom of a crevasse or gets stolen? And they said, well, we will have to make another. There's been several over the years that have been made, but the one I had was the actual live FA Cup.
What was it like taking it on that exhibition? Because you said taking a tripod was a nightmare. So what was the FA Cup like to haul around?
Well, I'm gonna have to fess up now. I didn't on that occasion. The expedition was that I was there to photograph a camp called White Desert in Antarctica, a really high-end luxury camp, and I was down there as a photographer doing some photography teaching and photographing the camp. And as part of that package, I flew to the South Pole with some of their clients. So it wasn't a laborious job carrying the extra 7 kilos, which is about the same as 2 D4 camera bodies, isn't it?
I guess one of the really interesting things, which is why I wanted to speak to you about it, is because you got a really, really interesting story and a very unique story that wouldn't have existed were it not for your original idea. Has there ever been other examples throughout your career where your initiative and willingness to approach someone with an idea has led to a story? Something that wouldn't necessarily have happened were it not for your initiative? Well,
that's a bloody good question, and this is the driving force that's taken me 20 years to develop. So again, I'm going to have to mention Paul Deegan's name again. So Paul Deegan was a professional writer, travel writer. He quite often would throw ideas at me. My favourite So Paul Deegan's the guy that took us to the premieres, and he came up to me and he said, Martin, we have to go to Zanskar to ski along this frozen river to a little village at the end of it. It's 150 miles, not ski, trek, walk, on this frozen river for 150 miles in the Indian Himalayas in the winter, because the Indian Army are building a road along the canyon that the river flows. And the river, Zanskar, is actually a school commute for the children. It's the only way in and out of this village for 8 months of the year because it's cut off by the Himalayan snow for a lot of the time. So the village has this, it's a micro habitat, I suppose, where they're totally self-sufficient. They grow a particular breed of sheep. They make their own wool from the sheep that makes their own clothes. They grow their own grain and all their food in the summer to help them survive the winter. So they're totally self-sufficient, and that culture was going to evaporate as soon as the road was completed. So, I mean, how can you not accept that kind of a photographer's role? Going to a place where the culture will evaporate and change and not be recorded. So that's another good example of a photographer joining forces with a writer, coming up with an idea and going away and creating a story from an idea and making it happen.
How do you... I read a statistic and I spoke to the wonderful Art Wolf last week.
Oh,
and the statistic was... Have you got one of his books?
Finally, somewhere. It's out of sight. I've got a couple of his books on my bookshelf. Anyway, amazing legend. Yeah.
Absolute legend and a thoroughly interesting and generous man. The statistic was that there's 1.8 billion images uploaded to the internet every day, so that's 657 billion a year. And bearing in mind, this was in 2014. So the question I asked Art was, what techniques has he developed over the years to find a unique perspective? And I'd like to ask you the same question, because you have a wonderful shot of what looks like a man stood on the moon. And of course, he's on a piece of ice. But it's a very, very interesting shot, and I'll be honest, it's something I would not have even thought of taking. So firstly, would you mind explaining what that shot is and how you took it, but also what techniques have you developed over the years that allow you to think outside the box and find new perspectives?
Oh, wow. Another good question. So there's quite a story behind that picture. One of my photographic heroes, Galen Rowell, he wrote a book. He's an American photographer. He wrote a book called The Art of Adventure Photography. And then he wrote another book called The Inner Game of Outdoor Photography, which is about the psychology of taking photographs. And there's a concept in there called pre-visualization, which is thinking of an idea of a photograph before you take it, and then you go out and look for it. I've based a lot of my photography on that concept of thinking of an idea for a photograph and then going out to find it and not stopping until you do, rather than doing what the 650 million photographers who upload pictures every day on Instagram, whatever. They just do it reactionary. Nearly all those pictures, there'll be reactions to something. There won't be thoughts. That's what separates a photographer from an amateur photographer, is the capacity to think of an idea and then create that idea, whether it's a studio photograph or a thought you've had about someone doing something and then going out to find it.
So you're active rather than reactive in that situation.
Yeah. So that picture that looks like it's taken at the top of the world, I stole that idea from Galen Rowell and developed it a bit further. So in one of the books, I can't remember which one it is, he's taken a picture on the northernmost beach of Greenland with a fisheye lens on his 35mm camera. And there's just the tiniest curve on the picture that's been created by the distortion of the fisheye lens. So I thought, right, I'm going to find a piece of ice that looks like a map of the world. Find a piece of ice that's got some snow on it that looks like a continent. And I'm going to take a stepladder with me. And then, because the higher up you go with the fisheye lens, and the more you point it down, you create a much fatter arc, a much more distortion. So we're in Resolute Bay where Penhadder was preparing his equipment for his solo North Pole expedition, because the Times, this is why I had to do this, I was forced into a corner by the Times newspaper, who commissioned me to photograph the document Penn preparing his sledge. They wanted a picture they could put on the front page when Penn got to the North Pole, the day he got to the North Pole.
Ah, I see.
So I think of an image that they could have that would illustrate him at the top of the world. But what they were thinking they were going to get was just a photograph of a guy with fancy goggles and a frosty beard. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could make that picture that Galen Rowell originally took, make it look like Penn was standing on top of the world. So that's why I thought, more distortion, a piece of ice with a landmass, a piece of snow on there, on the ice, it looks like a landmass. And then, as luck would have it, I found a piece of ice that looked like Africa. Assembled a stepladder, got on top of it, did a Polaroid back in the day of Polaroids on my Polaroid back on the camera, and I was absolutely shocked at how realistic that looked without any effort at all, really. And the effort was all the thinking behind it. I'd already done the hard work. Taking the picture was the easy bit. So then I went and got, when the weather was bad and the wind was blowing and the snow was blowing, then I got Penn from his base, took him out onto the sea ice, got my stepladder, assembled it, got on top of it, and then, boom, there you go, job done.
I mean, it is a stunning shot, and I will put a link in the show notes for anyone to go and have a look at it. I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful, beautiful shot.
That was part 1 of my conversation with the wonderful Martin Hartley. Part 2 will be available to listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you are listening now next Friday. That is the 31st of July 2020. Here is a sneak peek of what is to come.
It was my first day on the job, and it was like a scene from an Indiana Jones film. Literally driving through the desert for hours, and then we stopped in this only building in the desert, and there was lorries and cars full of chickens and goats, and we walked into this cafe. I had an interpreter with me, and a writer called Bernice Norton-Boone, and we went for lunch, and they'd all put their rifles on the table, and we sat in this room with about 60 weapons, big rifles, and AK-47s or Kalashnikovs and handguns resting on the tables next to their chicken and rice.
That conversation will be available next Friday. That is the 31st of July 2020. As always, if you are enjoying the Standout Photography Show, please support the show with your kind words, not lighter wallets. It takes less than 60 seconds on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts to leave a review, but it makes a huge, huge difference. Thank you, as always. If there's anything that sparked your interest during my conversation with Martin, you can find links and show notes over at thestandoutcompany.com/podcast. In the meantime, have yourself a wonderful day, and I will see you same time, same place, right here next week. I've been Matthew Walker, he has been Martin Hartley, and you have been sensational. Take care.